curious, how many people here think that Congress is going to come to its senses and solve this problem by Monday night? Any? How many? Jeez. How many people think we're going to have a government shutdown? Okay. Let me explain my analogy and what I think is going to happen. Maybe some of you have heard me say this before. I wasn't here last night. I had to go back to speak at an event at the National Zoo. I'm a regent of the Smithsonian, and the National Zoo is very popular these days because we've had a baby panda be born. And this is the most exciting thing in Washington, much more important than the government shutdown. And as I've gotten involved with pandas, I've learned something that I think is somewhat relevant to what we're talking about now, and that's this. There are 99% of all the species that ever exist on the face of the earth are extinct. 99% of all the species who have ever been here are gone. We have 5 million species left, and the most popular of those, other than humans, with humans probably like themselves, but is probably the panda. There are 7 billion people on the face of the earth. 7 billion people. Before I'm projected to die, there will be 9 billion people. There were only 2.5 billion people when I was born. So 2.5 billion people from 9 to 9 billion, a lot of people. There are only 1,600 pandas. Now, why are there so few pandas? Well, they only live in China, in northern China. They only eat bamboo. Bamboo grows in a very small number of places. But there's another problem. Whether you believe in God or evolution, there is a system that pandas have to reproduce that is unique among all mammals, and maybe all animals. And that's this. The female panda can reproduce only for about a 4-hour period of time, 1 day a year. So think about that. How many people would there be if people could only reproduce 1 day a year? Now, so the pandas, the way they do it in the wild is the female leaves a hormone sense on a tree that says, in 4 weeks I'll be ready for, reproduction. And the male leaves some hormone saying, in 4 weeks I got the message, I'll be there. 3 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. They get there, the appointed day. Well, if you only do this 4 hours a day, 1 day a year, you don't really know where the part's supposed to go. And so they kind of fight together, and a lot of it doesn't really happen the way it's supposed to go. It's like it's what I analogize it to Congress. Congress knows what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't know how to do it. And it's the same thing with pandas. So unfortunately, we have to use a lot of artificial insemination. I wish we could have artificial insemination in the Congress. Unfortunately, that's probably not going to happen. What Tom was talking about, to be serious, was something that I told him, and I'll just very briefly before lunch give you a little glimpse of what he and I were talking about. I came from very modest circumstances, and my tax return might be bigger than it used to be. It wasn't foreordained that it would be the case. Your last name is Rubenstein. You might think the father was a lawyer or doctor or something like that. My father dropped out of high school to go into World War II. He never went back to high school. My mother never graduated from high school. They married when my mother was 17. My father was 20. I was born more than 9 months later. I was an only child, grew up in a Jewish ghetto in Baltimore, the most rigidly segregated city by religion in the United States. I didn't know anybody wasn't Jewish until I was probably 13. And it was a very unusual place. And ultimately, I realized that to get somewhere, I'd have to do it on my own, and I got lucky. But in the 6th grade, I read the speech of John Kennedy. I was in 6th grade. How many of you remember the speech that John Kennedy gave that famous day on January 20th, 1961? Well, I read that speech. My teacher went over it, and it kind of stayed in my mind. I said, well, I'd like to go serve my country. And so I decided I'd become a lawyer and try to go serve my country. I didn't have the charm, the good looks, the money of John Kennedy, but I thought that maybe I could help as an advisor. So I got a scholarship to go to Duke, and I got a scholarship to go to the University of Chicago Law School, and I went to work for the man who wrote that great speech with John Kennedy, Ted Sorensen. He was at a firm in New York, Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Morton, and Garrison. And after a while, I practiced law for a couple of years, and I was willing to want to go to Washington. I told my colleagues, well, I think I'm going to leave. None of them said, don't. I told my clients I might get out of the practice of law, have to turn over your case to somebody else. They said that'd be fine. So I got the hint. I got the hint that I wasn't a great lawyer. I got the hint. And finally, I got a job with a man that Ted Sorensen said would be the next president of the United States, 1976. I became his chief counsel, and I thought I'd be on my way to the White House. The man's name was Birch Bayh. Any of you remember him? I joined, and 30 days later, he dropped out of running for president. He dropped out because in this state, he came behind the anti-abortion candidate, Ellen McCormick, and he came in 5th, and he dropped out. So I figured I wasn't a great lawyer, and I obviously wasn't a great political person. 30 days after I joined a campaign, I was out of a job practically. And so as it may have happened to some of you, I got a call out of the blue that changed my life. And if I hadn't been there to take the call, I don't know what I would have done. The call was, would you like to join another presidential campaign? And of course, I rolled my eyes and I said, who is it for? And they said, Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, I guess I've heard of him. Okay. So I went to work in the general election part of the campaign, and when I joined Carter, he was 33 points ahead, and he won by 1 point. So Carter often said, like, what was your contribution? Well, White House staffs are not filled on merit, and as all of you may know, they tend to be filled by people working the campaign. So I became, at 27, the Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor to the President of the United States, 3 years out of law school. Now, I wasn't qualified to be the Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor to the President of the United States, but most people in the administration weren't qualified, I felt, so I wouldn't have stood out. And I managed to get inflation to 19%, very difficult to do. Got mortgage rates at 22%, even harder to do. And there was a rumor that if Carter was reelected, I would be the second-term top domestic advisor. And on the strength of that rumor, President Carter thinks he lost the election. Who knows? So as Harry Truman said, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. All the people tell me how bright I was, and they would hire me. I started calling them, and none of them would hire me. None of them. Because who wanted a Carter aide when the age of Reagan was coming along? So after many, many, many months, a law firm felt sorry for me. I got a job. I started over again at the bottom, and I realized once again I probably wasn't a great lawyer. My clients wanted to know how much longer I was going to do this, and my colleagues in the firm said, if you want to leave, it's not a problem. So I took a chance, and I read that on average an entrepreneur will do something between the age of 28 and 37. Now, there's always a Bill Gates and there's always a Mark Zuckerberg, but most entrepreneurs start their first business between 28 and 37. And I read that when I was 37. So I said, okay, I got to do something different. So I decided to start a business in Washington, and with 3 other people, and I raised $5 million, and we built a company that became a very large private equity firm. And when I turned 54, I read in the press about my net worth, depending, I don't know how they figured it out, but it was clear that it was more net worth than I'd ever had when I was in Baltimore. And I realized that I read that also that a white Jewish male who reaches 54 will probably live another 27 years on average. So I realized I'd lived 2/3 of my life, and I had 1/3 to go. Now I realized I could take all my wealth and keep accumulating it, and when I died, I'd be the richest person in the cemetery, or I could take my wealth with me like the ancient pharaohs did, and take your wealth, and maybe you need it in the afterlife. But I thought I probably didn't need my money in the afterlife, so I decided to basically give away the money. And I signed the Giving Pledge. I was one of the first 40 people to sign it with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. And I've decided to do as much as I can to give away my money, but try to do it in intelligent ways. It's not, as all of you know who are involved in philanthropy, it's much harder to give it away than to make it. And I don't have the resource of Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. So in much more modest way, I'm trying to figure out ways to do this. And let me just mention one area that I think might be of interest to you. And it came to me not because I hired McKinsey to tell me what I should do with my money, but it came kind of by happenstance, as maybe happened to you many times in your life. I was coming back from London, reading my mail, and I saw that evening I'd been invited to a reception. And the reception was at Sotheby's, and I'm not an art collector, so I'd never been to Sotheby's. And it said, you can get a chance to see the Magna Carta. I said, okay, I never saw the Magna Carta, I'll go see it. I get there, and I kind of worked there, and the curator told me that the Magna Carta, there are actually 17 copies of the Magna Carta, 15 in British institutions that'll never be sold, probably 1 in the Australian Parliament, and Ross Perot had bought one in 1981 or 2 for about $1.5 million or so, and he had put it on display at the National Archives, but maybe he got in a dispute with the National Archives, or for whatever reason he wanted to sell it, and it was going to go tomorrow night in the auction with the highest bidder, and the curator said it would probably go to the somebody from outside the country. She mentioned 1 or 2 countries. And so right then and there I said, uh-oh, that's not a good. It's the inspiration for the Declaration of Independence, the inspiration for the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the things that enable me to rise up from modest circumstances are kind of the freedoms that are embodied in these documents. So I really want to do something about it. I decided I was going to go buy the Magna Carta. Now, it's somewhat presumptuous to say I'm going to go buy the Magna Carta, so I didn't want to tell anybody. And I thought my children might say, well, how much less money will this mean for us? They don't know. So I went back the next night. They changed my schedule, went back. I get back to Sotheby's the next night, 7 o'clock, the auction starts. I get there at 5 of 7. I want to go down and get, sit there and you can raise your hands. And they said, no, don't do that. It's too visible. Go sit in a little room. So they put me in a room. They locked the door. And all of a sudden, I start bidding. And all of a sudden, the curator and the auctioneer said, sold. I realized I had bought it. So the head of Sotheby's came in and said, who are you? We don't know you. I said, well, I explained who I was. He says, okay, you have the money for this? I said, yes. Okay. He says, okay, well, we won't tell anybody who won, because we keep things secret, but there are 100 reporters who want to know who bought the Magna Carta and what's going to happen to it. So I said, no, I want to tell them, and I'm going to go out and tell them. So I said that I was going to give it on a long-term loan, and on my death it would go to the National Archives as a down payment on my obligations to repay this country for the good fortune I've had. Because I realized, as I thought about that, I've been very fortunate, my family's been very fortunate, and I really have been able to do this in this country, which has these incredible freedoms, and that's made people like me from modest circumstances be able to rise up. So I did that, and today it is there, and anybody can see it. And I got in the habit of buying other historic documents, making sure Americans would know that they were around and recognize the importance of the freedoms in those documents. So the Declaration of Independence or the Emancipation Proclamation. I bought a rare copy of the Emancipation Proclamation and I gave it to the president. It's in the Oval Office now, and other documents like that. I recently bought a rare copy of the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, and giving that to the African American History and Culture Museum. And by doing this, I'm trying to convince people a bit that not only you should learn more about our country and the great freedoms it has that enable people like me to do what we've done, but do something that I call patriotic philanthropy, giving back to your country. And what I was referring to earlier in the session with Larry is that all of us here, if we can be at this session, presumably you've been very successful in life, and therefore this country has made it possible for you to be successful. And so maybe when you're thinking about philanthropy, yes, it's important to give the universities and the medical research, and I try to do as much of that as possible, but give things back to your country as well, because our country doesn't have the resources it once had. It just doesn't. And therefore, if you can give to organizations like the National Archives, the Smithsonian, the Kennedy Center, or the National Park System, other things like that, I think it's a good thing to do. And I recently did something that got more attention than anything else I've done, though I wasn't by far the most significant thing I think I did. But when the Washington Monument had an earthquake, I decided I would put up the money to help repair it. I said, I'll put it all up. Ultimately, Congress said, no, we want some credit for helping do something, so we'll put up half of it. So they put up the half of it. And recently, when there's scaffolding there, if any of you from Washington see, the scaffolding is more beautiful than it was before, and some people want me to keep the scaffolding up. Anyway, recently, I had a chance to go up on the outside of the Washington Monument. Some of you may have been on the inside of the Washington Monument. I went up on the outside with the scaffolding, and I was supposed to go up in the elevator and get to the very top of the peak, and then, be harnessed and get up there and be above the peak. And I thought, okay, so I went there that morning, and the Secretary of Interior showed up, and she's new, and she said, well, she's a mountain climber, let's not take the elevator, let's climb up. I said, well, she said, I've climbed Mount Rainier 7 times. I said, well, I've flown over it 7 times, and if I want to climb. I said, is there a defibrillator here if we're going to do this? Because I'm not in shape, you are. So she got in there in about 30 minutes, and about 2 hours later, I got to the top. But it's an incredible view. When you're at the top of the Washington Monument, you see the greatest view of Washington you can possibly see. And it just kind of saw the nature of the city and how great it was, kind of came back to me. And what our government has been able to do through bad and good times. The country's had lots of struggles, but all of us are beneficiaries of the people who've gone before us, and I think all of us should try to do something to give back to the country. And I would just close by saying that all of you, no doubt, are being involved in philanthropy, and philanthropy is not rich people writing checks. The ancient word philanthropy is an ancient Greek word. It means loving humanity. It means helping other people. And so you can help other people with your ideas, your time, or your energy. It doesn't have to be with writing money, but whatever you might do with your energy, your time, your ideas, try to do something to help the government that really enabled us to really build this incredible system. And I just give you 3 reasons why I think you should do so. 1, you will live longer if you do so, because when you give back to your country, I think you'll feel better about yourself. And when you feel better about yourself, I have a theory that you'll live longer. People who, nobody gives back to the country and all of a sudden says, geez, I feel bad about myself. I wish I hadn't helped my country. Nobody feels that way. When you feel better about yourself, you'll live longer. Secondly, I do think it's a natural human instinct to want to help other people. That's what separates us from other mammals. We want to help people more than just in our family. And I do think it's a great human instinct, and to do this, and I really think you might actually do something good. John McEnroe, when he was a tennis player, when he was being taught by Harry Hopman, the great tennis coach, he said, when a ball's coming over the net, if it's difficult to reach it, just stick out your racket, and something good might happen. You never know. Well, the same thing is true. When you're helping other people, everything won't work perfectly. When you're helping your country, it may not help perfectly, but you may do something good, and why not take a chance? And the third reason is this. I think all of you who help your country in any way you can do so will probably get to heaven more quickly. Now, I can't prove that, but why would any of you want to take a chance? So, thank you very much.